The incredible life of Désirée Clary was shaped by a series of unforeseen events set in motion by the exciting times she lived through. Never interested in politics or achieving a high status in society, she ended up becoming the queen of one of the oldest kingdoms in Europe. The youngest daughter of Rossomy and François Clary, a successful merchant trading in silk goods, Désirée Clary was born on the 8th of November 1781 and lived with her parents and her many siblings in a large house in Marseille. Money was no object when it came to the education of his daughter, so Mr. Clary sent Désirée to study in a convent for some time, but when it was shut down by the revolutionary regime, she returned home. The turbulent times that followed after 1789 brought changes to the French nation, and the Clary family was living in fear of losing their livelihood and even their lives. Many of the well-off merchants were imprisoned during those times, and if there was the faintest trace of prosperity or connection with the nobility, that could easily spell trouble for one's life. In January 1794, when Désirée was barely 12 years old, her father died and her brother Etienne took over the family business. When it was discovered that Etienne's father had sent a petition to King Louis XVI to make him a nobleman, Désirée's brother was arrested, and it was feared that his fate would be decided by the revolutionary tribunal. Etienne's wife realized that speed was of the essence, and she rushed to go and speak to the authorities on her husband's behalf to ask for a pardon. Désirée accompanied her sister-in-law, and while waiting in the office to be seen by the man in charge, Désirée fell asleep. When her sister-in-law was called in, she went in without Désirée. Obtaining what she needed, she rushed to the prison to hasten the release of her husband, leaving Désirée there. It was getting late, and after a while, Désirée was woken up by a young man who offered to take her back home safely. After asking the young man what his name was, Désirée invited him to meet her family. He presented himself as Joseph Bonaparte, and he returned the following day as agreed. Clearly impressed by the Clary family, Joseph started visiting them frequently, and soon he decided to ask Désirée's mother for the permission to marry her daughter. His proposal was accepted, but Joseph would need to wait until Désirée would turn 16. Joseph was attracted to Désirée not only for her looks, but also for her financial situation. Struggling to make ends meet, the Bonaparte family was poverty-stricken. One day, one of his brothers traveled to Marseille to see his family, and he accompanied Joseph visiting the Clarys. His brother was the 25-year-old newly appointed General of Brigade for his contribution to the siege of Toulon, called Napoleon Bonaparte. Once Napoleon got involved with the Clary family, the plans changed. Désirée's older sister Julie, who was rather shy by nature, was secretly attracted to Joseph. Realizing what was happening, Napoleon suggested that his brother should marry Julie instead, who was 10 years older than Désirée. That being so, Joseph did not have to wait to get married, and Napoleon would marry Désirée upon her reaching the age of 16. Amused by Napoleon, clueless Désirée was happy with the plan. Needless to say that the two penniless brothers were delighted about their choices. Joseph married Julie on the 1st of August 1794, and Napoleon and Désirée got engaged shortly after that. The incredible adventures of their lives would begin. Napoleon continued with his work career away from Marseille, writing to Désirée, who in a short time declared herself in love with him. While Napoleon was in Paris, Désirée wrote letters to express her deep affection to him, but at the same time she was worried that he would find Paris more entertaining than Marseille. When Joseph was sent to Genoa to work on a mission of the government, Julie, Désirée and their mother followed him. Meanwhile in Paris, Napoleon was describing the atmosphere of the city in a letter to his brother saying, Here in Paris, luxury, enjoyment and the arts are resuming their sway in surprising fashion. Smart carriages and fashionably dressed people are seen about again. They have the air of waking up after a long dream and forgetting that they ever ceased to display themselves. Women are everywhere, applauding the plays, reading in the bookshops. The lovely creatures even gain access to the professor's study. Paris is the only place in the world where they deserve to steer the ship of state. The men are mad about them, think of nothing else, only live by them and for them. Give a woman 6 months in Paris, and she knows where her empire is and what is her due. Desiree was right. Napoleon was enjoying his time in Paris, and by the summer of 1795 he had met Josephine de Beauharnais, therefore breaking off the engagement with Desiree, who was heartbroken. When she heard that in the spring of 1796 he married Josephine, Desiree wrote to Napoleon to express how she felt about it, saying, "You have made me unhappy for the rest of my life, and still I am weak enough to pardon you for all. My misfortunes will teach me to understand men and to distrust my own heart." The fact was that Napoleon wanted a sophisticated woman, and Desiree was in his eyes just a young provincial town girl. He had become less interested in her once he started earning money and when his position in the army changed. His family was taken aback by his decision of marrying Josephine, and they actually sided with Desiree, but Napoleon was in charge of his own destiny. Desiree remained in Genoa with her relatives, where she spent the winter of 1796, and soon she attracted the attention of General Dufault, an officer in the French army occupying the city, who started courting her. When she moved to Rome with her sister and Joseph, who had been appointed ambassador in Rome, Dufault followed her there to pursue his plan with the approval of Napoleon himself, who wrote to Joseph to facilitate the marriage between Desiree and General Dufault, recommending him as an excellent match for Desiree. Even Joseph and Julie tried to convince Desiree to accept the marriage proposal, but she was very firm. She did not like him. By December 1797, when her brother-in-law was recalled to Paris, Desiree joined Julie and Joseph, going to Paris for the first time. When Julie and her husband started hosting parties, balls and social gatherings, Desiree became courted by many officers who were frequently visiting the house of Joseph Bonaparte. Being beautiful, rich and connected to the Bonaparte family, Desiree was a very suitable match for her many admirers. By then she had refused many suitors, but in 1798, when Desiree was 17, Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, a general in the army of the French Republic, asked her to marry him, and she accepted it. Bernadotte was 35 years old, well-mannered, good-looking and kind-hearted. She found him different, and she explained the reasoning behind her decision by saying, "I consented to marry him when I was told he was man enough to withstand Napoleon." Bernadotte was an ambitious, intelligent man who realized that marrying a woman closely connected to Napoleon would play to his advantage. The couple had a son in July 1799 when Desiree was 18. She was deeply devoted to Bernadotte, who was patient and kind to her, although she was often under the influence of the Bonaparte family. She paid attention to her husband's political dealings, and many times she reported to Joseph what Bernadotte was doing, but he was able enough to keep the political matters to himself. He simply adored Desiree for her very amiable disposition and her generous temperament. When Napoleon returned from Egypt, Desiree met him again, and being more mature by then, and probably over the heartbreak he had caused her, they were able to establish a friendly relationship. While Bernadotte was away with his work, Desiree spent time with her son Oscar and Julie. The two sisters had a very close bond throughout their lives, and helping each other with raising their children came naturally to them. Bernadotte was constantly writing letters to his wife when he was away in command in La Vendée. Deeply in love with Desiree, he expressed his concern about not having news from her, saying, "I have not received a line from you since I left. I shall become jealous if you continue to be so lazy. You know I do not like extremes, but always a safe middle course." In a short while he was asking her to come and spend time with him, saying, "The springtime of life passes like a shadow, and winter with its frosts will come to us only too quickly. If, at the end of the month, Bonaparte does not send me to the coast of Flanders, I will write and remind him of his promise, and if nothing new happens, you will be able, if you like, to come and spend the month with your husband." However, Desiree adored living in Paris, where she was happily spending her time by taking lessons in music and dancing. To her delight, Bernadotte agreed and said, "Pleasant accomplishments such as dancing and music are very essential." After the proclamation of the Empire, Bernadotte became Marshal and Prince of Pontecorvo, but Desiree was not too enthusiastic about becoming a princess herself. She feared leaving Paris, but when she was told it was just a title and there was no need for her to leave Paris, she was relieved. Bernadotte was sent to Hamburg as governor, and then he was appointed commander-in-chief of the French army in Lower Saxony. The couple kept in touch by letters, and Desiree became her husband's little spy, watching the course of events in Paris. In the spring of 1806, Joseph was made King of Naples by Napoleon, so accordingly Julie was supposed to follow her husband there. Like her sister, Queen Julie dreaded leaving Paris, but when Napoleon told her she had to, she went there for a few months. When Joseph was made King of Spain in 1808, Julie refused to join her husband and came back to Paris, where the two inseparable sisters lived together, enjoying their glamorous social life. Meanwhile in Sweden, King Charles XIII and his wife Queen Charlotte were not successful in having any children, so the question of the succession to the Swedish throne had to be addressed. When the search for a successor began, Bernadotte's name came up and he was adopted by the childless royal couple as their son. Therefore, Bernadotte became heir presumptive and Prince of Sweden. It was a godsend to Bernadotte, who realized he would be in charge of a great kingdom and away from Napoleon's constant suspicion of him. Desiree assumed it was just another title that her husband acquired, not giving too much thought about becoming a royal princess herself. But soon she was informed that she would eventually become queen. "Queen?" cried Desiree. Would that mean she had to leave Paris? She was in utter despair. Becoming a royal princess was no consolation for having to leave Paris, her sister and friends. Bernadotte went to Sweden with Oscar in October 1810, and Desiree tried to delay her departure from France as much as possible, but soon it was essential for her to go to Sweden. Even the emperor remarked that it was rather improper for Desiree to live away from her husband and her son. She had to give in. She travelled to Sweden during the winter season and arrived there in January 1811. Although she was welcomed by the king and the queen with great pleasure, Desiree found Sweden a cold country with totally different manners and attitudes compared to France. Longing to return to Paris, she told Bernadotte that life at court was not to her taste, she craved for the pleasures of Parisian life, and the weather was unbearable. After all, she was a girl born and brought up in the sunny south of France. Bernadotte gave in to her pleas and let her return to Paris, thinking that she could send him information about the political situation in France. If one day Bernadotte could succeed Napoleon in France, she was connected to all the intrigue and plots of the Parisian salons. She lived in Paris under the name of Countess of Gotland, negotiating between her husband and French politicians. When Bernadotte opposed Napoleon regarding the continental blockade, the emperor was furious, but her husband was loyal to Sweden, and in 1813 Sweden decided to join the coalition against France. Désirée's life and position in Paris was becoming difficult, Napoleon declaring she should be living in Sweden, not in France, but she managed somehow to stay in France. Meantime in Sweden, Prince Oscar turned 18, and when Charles XIII died in 1818, Bernadotte became King of Sweden and Norway as Charles IV John. Yet Désirée was not interested in being a queen, continuing to live in Paris, still unable to make a decision about leaving France. Bernadotte was begging her to go to Sweden, where the presence of the Queen was needed. He made plans for his son to travel to meet his mother in the hope that maybe she would agree to join them in Sweden. After 12 years, Prince Oscar traveled to see his mother, and the plan worked. Désirée would join her family in Sweden. After traveling to Brussels to see her sister, Désirée found out about her son's engagement to Princess Josephine of Leuchtenberg, the granddaughter of Josephine de Beauharnais. The 16-year-old Princess Josephine traveled from Munich to Sweden to be with her husband, Prince Oscar, and in June 1823, Désirée finally left Paris to reach Stockholm at the same time as her daughter-in-law. They both arrived in Stockholm, being welcomed by the Swedes, who celebrated the coming home of a bride for Prince Oscar and a queen for King Charles John. In a short time, unsurprisingly, Désirée wanted to go back to Paris, but the king needed his wife to stay with him more than ever, and he did not let her go. Although her husband did whatever he could for her to feel comfortable at court, Désirée felt isolated and lonely. It did not help that she was never able to learn the Swedish language. In August 1829, at the age of 48, she was crowned as Desideriea, Queen of Sweden, in a grand ceremony that impressed her deeply. What kind of thoughts were going through her mind? Surely she would have never thought that by marrying Napoleon's rival, Bernadotte, she would actually become one day queen. When King Charles IV John died in 1844, Désirée's son became King Oscar I of Sweden. King Oscar and his wife had 4 sons and a daughter, therefore the dynasty of Bernadotte being firmly established. Queen Désirée was lucky to live a trouble-free life, unlike so many of her friends, but she still missed her exciting life in Paris. Once she went as far as to embark on a ship to Paris, but she changed her plans at the last minute, realizing probably that her life had changed completely and her previous years spent in Paris were just a memory. Her son's health started declining, and Désirée was devastated when he died after long suffering at the age of 60 in 1859. Queen Désirée of Sweden and Norway died the following year. One could say that fate was extremely generous to Désirée Clary, the daughter of a silk merchant from Marseille, who ended up becoming queen. In a way, her life had all the ingredients of a fairy tale.